Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank everyone for investing their time with us today. We're going to get started right away. We've got a lot of information we want to get through in the hour. We've got close to 250 registrants for today's webinar, which tells me this is a very top of mind topic. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Michael Douglas, and I will be today's host. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you would like. We just dropped a link in the chat box of the control panel for you to do so. Couple logistical items before we get going. Today's webinar is being recorded. That recording and the slides will be sent out to everyone tomorrow. All callers are default muted, so we encourage you to please ask questions in the questions panel in the GoToWebinar control panel. Time permitting, we will answer as many of those as possible live at the end, and then we'll follow up through email with any that we don't get to. Many of you today are already customers and users of ENFOS. Some of you are not. I'll provide a very brief introduction, and if you're interested in continuing the conversation, my contact information will be on the last slide. ENFOS is a software company that helps organizations manage all of their project, financial, and environmental data around their remediation projects in one place. We've been doing this for over 20 years. Having that capability allows our customers to manage their entire portfolio the exact same way at any scale while removing many existing administrative burdens. And with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Roger Well is a co-founder of ENFOS and currently serves as our Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. He has over 30 years of experience in the field, having started his career as an environmental consultant. Roger has a bachelor's and master's in geology in addition to an MBA. He's written several papers and presented on multiple topics related to operational excellence, data insights, and building business cases. We've listed a few of those here, and in fact added one over in the control panel of GoToWebinar under handouts. Also, we've added a link to Roger's LinkedIn in the chat box if you would like to directly connect with him there. So I'll turn it over to Roger.
Great, thank you, Mike. And I also would like to welcome everyone and thank you for the interest in this webinar as well as webinars that we've had in the past. And many of you that signed up also attend our conference event. So we appreciate that very much. So this is a very special and challenging webinar in that we're attempting to distill everything we've learned through customer engagement over the last 10 years into a 1-hour segment. So you guys probably know in reality that's an impossibility, but I can assure you we're going to give it our best shot, and hopefully we pulled out the most key and relevant points for everyone. We like to start with setting some expectations around what you're going to learn. So even though we've been doing these assessments for 10 years, we started our company 20 years ago when we built the first commercial business application to help companies run their remediation business function. As we mentioned, about 10 years ago, we deployed a new problem-solving model and methodology that we call the Remediation Business Capability Assessment. You'll hear me use the acronym BCA to define that. But the BCA came about because companies that were looking to improve their remediation function and to enable performance, they encouraged us to help them understand if they were running their business in the best possible way with the information technologies that were available to them. And in other words, they asked for our help to assess if they were doing the right things and if they were doing things right. So what you're going to learn today are the key takeaways from those assessments, along with the discussion on how many of these companies solved their problems and eventually leapfrogged over their industry peers. I've mentioned the BCA. This is our problem-solving model that we use to engage with remediation organizations that are on a journey to improve and modernize. The BCA involves a very intense customer engagement process. It involves a lot of people from several business functions within the customer organization. And the BCA may also involve representation from one or more of their environmental consulting firms. We use several tools, such as a pre-assessment pain survey, in-person workshops and interviews, capability maturity models that we have created specifically for the remediation function. There are many different problem-solving models, right? There's lean, there's TQM, there's capital value process, and many, many more. So this is just our model. It's worked out very well, and it gives us a lot of information that you might not normally get in regular conversations. One of the flaws with problem-solving models is that many of them are light on delivering solutions. We all know that identifying problems is a very big part of coming up with solutions, but many of the models are flawed in that they don't have a solution to the problem that they're actually analyzing. With the ENFOS business capability assessment, we've solved that partly through our commercial application that's purpose-built for this job, but also in our rapid implementation process and the best practices that we've learned through those 20 years working with companies like yours. So I'd like to take a step back before we get into the weeds on the data and the insights, and just talk about remediation management as a business function in general. Remediation has a complex business model as depicted here. You can look at really any part of this, and if you peel back the onion there, you're going to find complexity. Some of the key points are listed at the top right. We've got many professional disciplines, many complex engineering and scientific work to take place. There are thousands of transactions and documents and deliverables that are created. You're working within a complex regulatory environment. The work is predominantly outsourced to environmental consultants, contractors, and laboratories. And as you're going to find out, if you don't know already, there are many, many information management systems set up in this model that have actually increased complexity inadvertently. I mentioned the customer journey in my opening. This is an illustration of a customer journey process. Each company we work with has a little different take on that, but this is really kind of a summary and an industry standard. What we're talking about today falls in the assessment stage, and those have a lot of elements to them as well. And many times our customers or prospective customers have their own evaluation and assessment processes. All right, so let's start looking at the sample size and the profile of the samples. So we've done business capability assessments with 20 different companies in many different industries, as you can see here. Each company that has gone through this engagement with us has had anywhere from 5 to 20 people involved in the assessment stage. So you can do the math there if you think about 20 companies and sometimes up to 20 people per company. We're engaging with a lot of folks that are involved in this process. This table shows the scope of responsibility of those 20 companies, just to frame that out. So there's $6 billion worth of environmental remediation liability being managed by these organizations. The mean is about 300 million. You can see the annual spend numbers, the project numbers, and then the very bottom number would be their existing or as-is information systems that were in place to help them run the remediation business. And yes, that is 10 different business systems or applications strung together to do the job of running the remediation function for these organizations. The breakdown here is by role. So you can see it's very much dominated by the business of the remediation professionals, vice presidents and directors and regional managers, project managers, and then a smaller percent of the supporting business functions like finance, accounting, and IT. Before these companies got to that stage of the journey, these are the common characteristics that they shared. A strong desire to improve. They're looking for some type of modernization or digital transformation journey. Executive leadership was actively engaged. They're looking for sustainable solutions. They all had a heavy reliance on spreadsheets, custom software, or generic business software. And the ERP, such as SAP or Oracle, hasn't delivered for the remediation business function. And because of that, the shadow systems have multiplied. So this is a snippet of our survey that comes out as a pre-assessment. We give this to all of the participants who are going to be involved in the workshop and the engagement process. It's intended to help us narrow in on the most painful parts of their as-is operation. The construct of the survey consists of 5 general portfolio questions and 25 very specific functional questions. The rating system uses a relative pain scale from not painful at all to severely painful. And our questions also probe the interrelationships and connectivity of the individual process areas, as well as the accessibility to their data and the knowledge that they want to glean from it. Each of the 25 questions are associated to a core process area shown in this slide. Each BCA engagement, our customer defines the functional areas that they're most interested in. The vast majority of our BCAs have included all of these functional areas, but not all. Our team reviews and analyzes the responses from the surveys that are constructed from these process areas. However, for this study and webinar, we've compiled the data from all of the customer BCAs to present a much larger, bigger picture of the industry. As was predictable, we found very common characteristics and a strong relationship of the results between companies. So what I'm moving into now is going to be a discussion and presentation of the results around 5 different question groups from the functional areas that I just showed you. The first one being access to data and information. 85% of the respondents say that the data they require for running their remediation business is not readily available or retrievable. So the process I'm going to take on the webinar is we're going to present the result like I'm doing here. And then the second slide is going to be a combination of the problems that were identified, basically the root cause of this factor, as well as some of the implications. So for this question group 1, access to data and information, these were some of the main insights that were pulled from our workshop findings. As I mentioned on an earlier slide, there are many different systems currently in place to do the job for the remediation business function, 10 on average, which is quite incredible if you think about it. In addition to 10 different systems, there's a proliferation of spreadsheets, thousands upon thousands through the years, versions, edited, changes, and so on. The email inbox with attachments is the predominant conveyance method of data and information. Data also resides with consultants and laboratories, where much of its strategic value is lost. Data is not uniform or consistent across the portfolio or within teams. And my little side note is how could it be, since it's basically being managed ad hoc and on a very discrete basis. Because data is siloed, it is often without context, reducing its usefulness to inform. And finally, and certainly not last, corporate IT generally does not understand the remediation business. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. Question group 2 is around project portfolio management. 76% of respondents were dissatisfied with their ability to track and manage sites, including status and progression towards their endpoints. The insights, you'll see this over and over again, but multiple systems, both internal and external. Internal meaning the corporate office or business function. External meaning the suppliers. No data governance program and a lack of data standards around project portfolio management. There's a wide performance variance between consultant teams. Even within the same company, there's variance between teams supporting the customer. Past efforts around project portfolio management have failed or were not sustainable. Performance around this is not tracked or measured consistently. And finally, the issue around mega sites versus smaller sites was a common theme as well. And what we found was that on mega sites, many of the customers that went through this process did not have the concept of breaking their mega sites down into smaller, more manageable entities or area of concern, which is essential for success on mega sites. Group 3, lifecycle cost and reserve management. 86% say the processes associated with site strategy, financial planning, decision support documentation, and reforecasting could be better and would lead to more effective outcomes. The insights in this area show that almost all of this is performed using spreadsheets, and that includes several of the steps in the process, such as the original cost buildup, scope management, cost estimating, forecasting on a timeline over the 30 or 40 or 50-year life cycle, and so on. Quarterly updates, annual deep dives, and so on are almost always performed using spreadsheets. Many handoffs, edits, and versions to manage, as you can imagine. There's an issue around the remediation team versus the finance or accounting team, and this concept of multiple versions of the truth. We heard many, many times that the project team working on the actual site strategy and the remedial action plan and the costs associated with that would have one version of the life cycle estimate, and the finance and accounting team would have another, and they weren't in sync. Most of the time, this was not deliberate. It was just a fact that was created because of primarily of spreadsheet usage and lack of a single point of entry for the management of that one version of the truth. There's a variation in the requirements buildup, cost buildup methods, and backup documentation. We saw many of the companies, most of them not utilizing a standard work breakdown structure, not only for lifecycle forecasting, but also for vendor proposals, their purchases, and their spend management, which is the invoice transaction. Work commitments and expenditures or settlements to the reserve were not integrated with the plans directly. Almost every single time, spend is coming from a separate system. It's exported into a spreadsheet and then has to be manually manipulated and matched up to the actual reserved or liability entity to calculate a balance. Tremendous amount of work and effort, errors get introduced, and lag time exists. We see that change reasons for trigger events or because of the passage of time or a change in scope, but change reasons are not being tracked and managed in a consistent way. We also see that the participants talked a lot about a lack of a historical record and reasoning for past decisions. Some of that is because of turnover. Either the consultant turned over or the customer project manager turned over. They've inherited something that's in midstream or late stream, and they don't know how did we get to this point on where we're at right now. Question group 4. So managing plans, which we just talked about with life cycle and reserve, but managing plans versus work commitments versus our actual costs. So 88% of the group do not have fully integrated and aligned processes from forecasting to budgeting to purchasing to invoicing, creating inefficiencies, information time lag, rework, and surprises. This is one of the most fatal flaws that we see in use within remediation management organizations. Here are some of our insights from this area. There is no end-to-end fully integrated process. Separate applications are used for planning and forecasting versus procure to pay. You could even throw another one in there, another system that's different and unique for project management. Data structures are not consistent across processes, requiring extra processing. I can't tell you how many times when we look at an invoice from a consultant or a lab during these assessments, and we're looking for traceability on that invoice back to the purchase commitment, which should have been vetted against the financial plan or budget, and there's no relationship whatsoever in the cost structures or data structures, as I called out here. And that creates a tremendous amount of time to try to match or map those up. Most people end up not doing it, or if they do it, they do it to a rolled up level only at the site entity. No work breakdown structure detail whatsoever. The level of granularity for planning, purchases, and invoices is too coarse in many cases. I just described that. You can't do effective cost management unless you have cost detail. And that should extend from planning to purchasing to invoicing. Change management and change reasons not tracked uniformly. We've talked about that on the reserve, but that is also true on work commitments. So these would be change orders to purchases on committed dollars. There is a real sloppiness, if you will, to actually try to determine what is the basis of the change order. Is it new scope? Or is it purely a transactional feature because our company doesn't like to add change orders in SAP or Oracle or whatever ERP system? And we hear that a lot too. The systems are too difficult. It takes too much time for us to create a change order so we can actually track and manage these variances that happen. So we don't do it. We just tack on more money to the original purchase order. Project financial controls are not automated, so mistakes and surprises happen. So this has to do with the control across this end-to-end process. If I've got granular enough detail in my financial plan down to a work breakdown structure level, and that's been authorized and approved and vetted, when our suppliers start to do their scopes of work and proposals, that should be airproof for them already. They should only see those categories that are funded. Once those commitments are made and the invoices are being submitted, again, you want to be able to build into the process the actual mapping and matching of the WBS granularity all the way down to the invoice level of detail. Trends that should go easily detected go unnoticed until it's too late. So that's really an after the fact symptom of some of these other problems. So that was managing plans versus commitments versus actuals. Question group 5, environmental data stewardship. 67% of the organizations do not possess environmental data beyond what is provided in documents by their consultants, restricting the value to a single deliverable. And that would be also considered unstructured data. It's generally in a PDF type document. So let's talk about that a little bit more detail. Environmental data that's managed in this way is primarily informs only on a single site or a single event basis. Program level analysis is generally too burdensome to take on. That's related to our third item here. Site data, so that's information from a particular site, is not transformed for enterprise use. Environmental data is owned by the customer, but possessed by the suppliers. Technical data in context with financial data is not explored. That's partly because it would be too burdensome to transform it for enterprise use, so it doesn't get done. It's not set up to be done effectively. Data importing uses 30-year-old technology. And those of you that are environmental data managers, I'm sure you know what I mean, but what we're talking about here primarily is still the use of email and of flat files in EDF or EDD formats for data conveyance. This has been around for 30 years and in essence hasn't changed over that period of time. There are better ways. Field sampling and laboratory spend category information is lacking. Many of the customers that have implemented ENFOS are tracking that based on their defined work breakdown structures and cost categories. And so even though laboratory spend itself is anywhere from 5 to 10% of their total annual spend, the cost to plan for that, to manage and coordinate and execute the sampling activities, to collect and manage the field data that comes along with it is a very high percent of the spend. And finally, all remediation spend is 100% driven by environmental data results. This is something that you've heard Craig talk about at our conferences in the past if you've attended, but we all know that it's because of the presence of some contaminant in the subsurface that is driving the spend. The magnitude of that spend is driven by other factors, such as the regulatory environment, the demographics or the area-wide receptors based on the risk assessment, the geology, the operational status of the facility. All of those other factors affect the magnitude of the spend, but this very important environmental data stewardship concept is hinged on the fact that the spend is all driven because of these results. So I'm going to move into a little different area of discussion now. So those were the 5 categories that we presented. If you recall, we had 8 core process areas that we broke out the questions on. They were rolled up into 5 question groups that we just went through. But now I want to talk about a little bit of one of the other tools that we use during the business capability assessment. So this is post-survey. It's after we've conducted a multi-day workshop on site with the customer and their teams, and we've gone through the core process areas and done very detailed process reviews, looking for bottlenecks, looking for extra work, redundancies, low value added time. But we use a capability maturity model process that you can see is laid out here. And the construct of this is, you can see we've got project portfolio management, we've got 3 categories for financial management, from planning, that's the reserves and budgets, to the proposals and purchases, to the invoices and spend management. Then we have environmental data stewardship, and we have remediation compliance and asset management. So in the capability maturity model, those form the lanes. Those are the key process areas under evaluation. The capability maturity model then is a rating system after all the evidence has been gathered and analyzed that basically sets up a score that is either basic, moderate, or managed, or optimized high. Those that score in the optimized range basically mean they're doing the right things and they're doing things right, or that's the desired position in the maturity process. The actual scores are check marks. So when we do this for an individual customer, this would be like the summary level. But what you're seeing here is the actual averaged rating for all the 20 companies that we've done these assessments on. So it's not a real good scorecard. However, it's a journey, and it's a desired end state that's backed by leadership to move into the managed and more preferably optimized lane. The Ds are the desired. So this is a summary of all the organizations. So we basically can say that the organizations assessed all have a low maturity or a managed or moderate maturity around these core business processes. To expose one more level of detail, I have an example of the capability maturity model from reserve management. So those areas that you saw on the previous slide each have another level of detail that are looking for key business practices. These are what we would call the right things to be doing. And we evaluate their existing processes and systems to see how well, if at all, they're doing these. So this is reserve management. I'm not going to go through all of them individually, but I wanted to give everyone an example of what this methodology looks like. So for reserve management forecasting, you've got 9 practices: workflow automation and authorization, uniformity of WBS, plan change reason tracking, multiple scenario planning and trigger event management, justification and decision support, integration with purchase commitments and expenditures, real-time plan balances, project financial controls against plans, and then automated history tracking and audit details. This is a result from an actual company that went through this process, but this is a very typical type result. Okay. Once we finish the surveys and the workshops, and we've basically finished the deliverables around the capability maturity models, the next step in the business capability assessment is establishing a business case. And the business case is needed to justify the initiative or the project to change from their as-is processes and supporting technologies to something new or different. So this is our business case methodology. We break it down into cost savings categories that are listed here. Direct project cost savings, cost avoidance, transactional cost savings, and then internal overhead and management cost savings. You can see the description for each one of those categories there. This is built up and presented as part of our deliverable in the BCA report. And the backup documentation, the evidence for this comes from the capability maturity models, and then a workbook that contains 94 unique cost reduction levers. So those are specific tasks or actions in all of those processes that we were talking about that can be done more efficiently. Again, it's based on that company's as-is condition on what the magnitude of the savings are, but there's 94 different cost reduction levers that make up these 4 cost saving categories. I put this slide in because I do think it's important, and it comes up in the value proposition and business case every single time. And it's really a paradox of time and value for the remediation professional. So if I start at the bottom, 81% of the organizations that went through this process with us say that they spend too much time on low value data administration tasks. And it's not a uniform amount of time throughout the year, right? It might be more low value added time during the quarterly planning processes or updates, or the annual deep dives if you're still doing those. But it's also managing the transactions around work commitments, invoices, spend management, project management, and project controls, and so on. All things that are good to be doing, it's just that they're being done in a very low tech way, very manual, very ad hoc in nature. The complex project leadership model that you see here basically is saying to us that the more that we can have our teams focus on these above the line types of activities, the bigger gain we're going to have as an organization and the better performance we're going to have. So these items like strategy, advocacy to the regulators, stakeholder management, communication internally to other business functions or to the supply chain, managing people and people development and people skills, and then certainly managing and engaging with suppliers who do most of the work, versus these items below the line, which are necessary, but they don't need to be taking up extraordinary amounts of time. We consider these low value data administration tasks that can be optimized and automated. So process management, transactional management, your financial controls, managing systems and spreadsheets, the IT category, reporting, both standard reporting and ad hoc reporting, and then certainly any other back office type work that needs to get done. Okay. So the paradox is we're spending our time, a high percentage of our time, on these lower value activities that need to get done instead of these other activities that are higher value. So when a value proposition gets generated for a company that goes through this process, ENFOS can present a solid business case that's both qualitative and quantitative. But the one thing that software or technology cannot do is to tell you what to do with the amount of time that you've saved by automating and optimizing. That is up to the team and the leadership to make sure that happens with suppliers as well as with internal staff. All right, I'm going to move into really the last phase of the webinar today. And I mentioned this earlier, that all of the problem solving models do want to identify and help prioritize problems and their causes, without a doubt. But what many of them do not do is offer solutions. So we're going to talk a little bit about solutions that are purpose-built and made for this industry. So we talked about 10 different systems and applications that were in play with the companies that went through the process with us. And if you look at this, the middle cloud here, this is a depiction of the ENFOS software as a service platform. But you see that the project portfolio management, financial management, technical data, compliance, BI, and maps, and administration, those are all in the same system. So a reduction in complexity happens right there, right? Just by doing that alone. But there's a lot more deeper business enablement in this. Part of it is collaboration and interface management for your internal staff and your suppliers and stakeholders, with working within the same environment, populating the application in the course of people doing their work, not an after the fact, let's push this data now into this other system or move information around. The same is true on the back end. So there are other systems that do have to remain in play, ERP systems, procurement systems. There are data warehouses and BI applications. There's middleware, there's single sign-on, and certainly web services that have smaller jobs to do. But again, the technical architecture of a purpose-built solution needs to be able to automate that. So that improves speed, it reduces errors, and it reduces time and effort. I spent a lot of time talking about lifecycle cost and reserve management. And then we also talked about another group that was going from planning and budgeting to work commitments to invoicing. And I want to leave you with this solution schematic in mind on this end-to-end financial process that's highly integrated. So you can see here that this includes those buckets: forecasting and budgeting, proposals, purchases, and invoices and spend management, with financial controls and data structures built into those processes along with the automated workflow. So when we talk about solutions to those problems, this is already designed and built and proven through 20 years of ENFOS's experience working with remediation organizations. The other strategy and concept is taking procure to pay, which is necessary because we have to have purchase orders and invoices. People want to get paid for their work, obviously. But it's combining the project management elements with the procure to pay elements and then communicating on the back end to the transactional management system, like SAP, Oracle, Ariba, or so on. But the scope, cost, schedule, and deliverable management and those interfaces and collaboration are happening on the front end through a web-based remediation management platform. And the summary transactional level information is flowing automatically to those back-end systems, right? So there's two masters. There's an accounting master and there's a project manager master, and they're being addressed in a single process called Project Management Enhanced P2P. Environmental data stewardship was one of the question group areas. In our solution discussion, we're showing the center group here labeled ENFOS Enterprise, and you can see the various modules or solutions that are built in ENFOS for remediation management. I have the data module and the reporting module highlighted. If you look at the left-hand side of this graphic, you'll see the environmental supplier ecosystem. Another way of thinking about this is the environmental ecosystem is where the environmental data management happens. The consultants, the contractors, and the labs have spent millions and millions of dollars on their systems and processes and employee training. They know how to plan for and collect samples, communicate with the laboratories, analyze the results, use those results for the project work that they're doing. So the environmental data management's happening in the environmental supplier ecosystem, as it should. This is repeated over and over again on thousands and thousands of sites and sample events in each consultant office. The customer, moving to the right in the ENFOS Enterprise, wants the final result, not just as a PDF version of the report, but also the data. And that data can easily flow from the consultants' systems in their ecosystem and the labs via APIs into ENFOS. So now that it's available to be joined and put in context with the rest of the information that the customer is managing in ENFOS. The management information around sites and projects, the financial aspects that we've been talking about for reserves, commitments, and spend, compliance type activities and responsibilities, and the administration of it all in a secure environment. In addition, many of our customers have data warehouses and BI applications internally where they want the ENFOS data to maybe merge with other data sources. And ENFOS has an automated BI connectivity tool called OData that many of our customers are using today. So I have a few conclusions, and then we're going to open it up for some questions and answers. Conclusion 1, because remediation has a complex business model, most companies have unknowingly doubled down on the problem by creating unnecessary IT complexity to support the business. This is the 10 different applications to run the remediation business issue, right? It's no one's fault necessarily. It's how many companies have evolved, where they're trying to solve individual discrete problems with generic business software. And they try to string those systems together, and it generally still creates complexity and doesn't solve their problems. Conclusion number 2. Remediation management professionals want a single source that gives them the whole picture with informative content about the past, present, and future. This requires better accessibility, contextual relationships built into the data model, digital engagement with the supply chain, and traceability between decisions, actions, and results. You cannot get that when you're using multiple systems. Or if you are, you've set up a whole business process and structure on the side to be able to do that. Conclusion number 3. Leadership understands that the remediation business function is mature, but that the supporting information technologies and knowledge management assets are holding their teams back. The current situation that they find themselves in has limited their business capability, and it's created those inefficiencies caused by overly complex IT approaches. And the final conclusion, in summary, the companies that participated in our business capability assessments generated in their estimates, about 3 to 10% of an annual remediation spend reduction. That variance of 3 to 10% is caused by the size of their cost center and their technology maturity. We've had companies that have actually documented 15% annual savings, and that company had extremely low technology maturity at the starting point of their journey. Others that are looking maybe for 3, 4, 5% annual cost savings are maybe further along, but still have optimization and integration that they can do. Even with those 3 to 10% annual savings in the business case, the decision that the companies made to deploy ENFOS was driven by two things: business enablement strategy and the weak sustainability outlook of their existing systems and spreadsheets. They know that they can't go on indefinitely managing their business function on 10 different systems and hundreds of spreadsheets. Additionally, there are things that they could be doing to enable the business, strategic things that they're not doing because of the limitations of the technology that they have in place, such as automated financial controls, cloning and replication of repeated work transactions or work objects, as an example. Very granular, detailed information, from reserve management through spend management that they can then involve in business intelligence and so on. With that, we're going to move into the closing stages, and I'm going to turn this back over to Mike.
Thanks, Roger. So as mentioned previously, several of the companies on the call today have already gone through this assessment process with us. Several others are scheduling one with us now. The benefit is, regardless if you choose to move forward with ENFOS, you'll have a blueprint documenting your current state relative to your peers. It will get you asking different questions of your teams and arm you with process improvement ideas. So I'd like to invite anyone on today interested in learning more about the business capability assessment to start a conversation. I could explain in more detail our approach, methodology, your resource commitment, and the deliverables you get from us. You can either reach out to me or Evan directly, the contact information on the screen, or respond to the follow-up email you'll get tomorrow with the recording and slides, and we'll set up some time to talk further. Together, we could decide if it would make sense to do a workshop. Also, if you wish to book time now, Sherry dropped my calendar link in the chat box. That gives you access to my calendar, and you can pick a time that works for you. So with the 7 minutes we have remaining, if anyone wants to put any questions in the questions panel, feel free to do that. We do have a couple that have already come in that we'll address now, and then we'll shut this down right at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So the first question was, have there been any surveys after clients have implemented ENFOS to compare their pain points before and after?
Okay, Mike, you're going to turn that over to me?
Yeah.
Okay. We actually don't have a survey like you looked at there, but our customer engagement and sustainment phase, which is managed by Tori Behrens, she's our Director of Customer Success, basically has to do with fulfillment of those of the solution and also customer satisfaction. Some of our customers have gone through and actually measured their time and efficiency gains and cost saving gains. The majority don't, partly because they have day jobs and they're moving very aggressively and managing that work. Those that have, we've actually developed case studies on. Those are also available on the ENFOS website, where they'll show documented results and documented cost savings and return on investment. I believe that one of the customers where we have a case study did their post-implementation documentation about a year after they went live, and they determined that their return on investment was around 650%, so very, very high. Every company's different. Some are growing with liabilities, others are shrinking, right, in terms of numbers of projects, numbers of staff, what their annual spend is. There are other variables. There's mergers and acquisitions. Sometimes there's a policy change around their reserve management, where they maybe are extending years out, or they're adopting a different accounting standard for their reserve management. So a lot of times those other variables will blunt out the savings that we talked about on the 3 to 10%. However, all of our customers, though, have told us and will even speak on our behalf about those process areas and about the efficiencies they've gained around those.
Okay, thanks, Roger. So the next question, I did not see any questions or pain points regarding reporting outputs. For my organization, one of the most painful exercises is end of quarter reporting. How does ENFOS manage reporting and dashboards?
Sure. And it is very challenging and complex, no matter what system you're using for reporting. Partly because of, you know, that 90-10% rule, where 90% of everything lines up perfectly, but some small percent doesn't. 5 to 10% of some kind of a settlement or some kind of an expenditure or a journal entry or a backdated posting. So they're, you know, companies are going to have those issues to deal with based on their accounting practices and policies. Producing automated reports should be one of the requirements that gets analyzed or assessed by a company looking to modernize their technologies, because reports of all types, both management reports and site level reports, are required. So ENFOS has several features around that, including standard reporting with about 100 standard reports that are all configurable based on unique report criteria, and then, you know, customization around selecting, deselecting columns, sort orders, and formatting, and so on. We also have a report templating process where you can take raw data from any of those standard reports that I just talked about, and then multiple raw data reports, and combine that raw data into a report template that gets produced automatically by the system on a scheduled basis, and then distributed to the team members that need it. And then I also briefly mentioned the business intelligence reporting database that ENFOS maintains as part of the service, optional service, and then the connectivity to the customer's own data warehouse or BI application, like Power BI or Tableau as an example. And that's once that's set up, that OData connection, then all of the ENFOS data tables are available for that customer managed BI and data warehouse application. So customers are able to design and build their own dashboards and analytics as well with the ENFOS data source.
Okay, excellent. Roger, I got one more question here, and this will kind of wrap us up. Curious how you are scheduling business capability assessments with companies that are largely virtual now and are not able to accommodate face-to-face meetings. So I can take that one.
Yeah.
So, you know, previously we've done these majority face-to-face. It's typically a 1 to 2 day engagement. We build an agenda that gets mutually agreed upon in advance, and that agenda is broken down into sessions to cover the various key process areas that Roger discussed. So how we have been doing these virtually since COVID, and it's gone very well. The way we have found that works best is we use web meetings like this one. We turn on our webcams so that people can see each other. And instead of trying to squeeze everything in into one full day, we may take those sessions and then break those up over multiple days. We would advise you on which stakeholders should be involved in each of those sessions so that those stakeholders would only need to dial in during the sessions that were applicable to them. In addition, we have a information request form that we would send you in advance with a non-disclosure agreement so that we could get some details from you before the workshop sessions that allow us to do more pre-work and make the best use of everyone's time. And then the deliverable creation is done in the background. Roger and I do that. And then we send that to your team to review. And then typically there's a management presentation that we've also done virtually to go over the findings and recommendations. So with that, I want to thank everyone again for investing your time with us today. Hope you found it a good use of everyone's time. When you close down the webinar today, there'll be a 1 or 2 question survey. Just let us know if you enjoyed today's webinar, and we really appreciate that feedback. And thanks everyone again for your time today.
Thanks, everyone.